Welcome to the Story Truth Mine. Here there be spoilers. Too often, military science fiction and fantasy novels grant their characters an unnatural confidence that they're on the right side of a winnable war. This trend is even worse with female characters. It's like the writers simply can't fathom that a woman can simultaneously be strong and uncertain, fierce and unsure if the war was worth the sacrifice. In reality, the war novels that feel real, novels like The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien and Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, and now Adrian Tchaikovsky's Guns of the Dawn, teach us the truth, that war is a fog. War is a fog on the front lines, where soldiers rarely know what's happening in the battle that they're fighting in, let alone how their efforts fit into the overall war. And war is a fog on the home front, where civilians rarely know the truth and often believe transparent lies. Even just having lived through wars far abroad and proxy wars where the U.S. involvement's been limited to special forces participation or sending a seemingly unending stream of weapons, I have seen the fog of war on the home front. The majority of Americans believe that in the first Gulf War, Iraqi soldiers dumped unborn babies from incubators, that Iraq was involved in the attack on the U.S. on 9/11, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that we're arming moderate rebels to democratize Syria. More recently, that Hamas engaged in mass rape on October 7th, that Hamas burned babies in ovens, that Hamas beheaded children, and also that in his invasion of Ukraine, Putin was a neo-Hitlerian figure, hell-bent on conquering all of Europe, and equally importantly, that the proxy war was one more weapon system, or lower draft age, away from being won. Every one of those beliefs was inserted by propagandistic lies. There were no babies dumped from incubators in Kuwait. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And we have now, along with Turkey and Israel's aid, successfully installed a former member of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and al-Nusra as president in Syria. There was no mass rape on October 7th. There were no babies burned in ovens. There were no children whose heads were chopped off. And in Ukraine, Putin was not bent on conquering all of Europe, but sought to negotiate before the war and came to a tentative agreement with Zelensky to retreat to the pre-invasion line of control less than 1 month into the war. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson went to Ukraine to tell Zelensky that even if he was ready to negotiate a peace deal, the West was not and would not participate in the security guarantees. Now, you can say whatever you want about Putin, but agreeing to retreat to the pre-invasion line of control was hardly the action of a figure hell-bent on conquering all of Europe. And most importantly, we were lied to and told that Ukraine could win the proxy war. Every Ukrainian man and woman who has died since that deal was turned down in April 2022 has died for less than nothing. Ukraine will have less territory as a consequence of not having accepted that deal. Less. Russia will have more territory, Ukraine will have less territory. And Ukrainian dead, hundreds of thousands of men, are maimed or dead for less than nothing. The only people who have benefited are military industrial contractors who got to sell extra weapons to Ukraine, sell extra weapons to the U.S. to replace the weapons sent to Ukraine, sell extra weapons to the new members of NATO, and sell extra weapons to the existing members of NATO. But we believed lie after lie, justifying war after war. And that just gives you a hint of the kind of propaganda environment which Emily Marshwic, the protagonist of Guns of the Dawn, would have faced. Because the war wasn't a distant war for her. The war, was between her country and their neighbor. So the propaganda environment would have been even more intense. There would have been even more censorship. And because of that, Emily believes that the war is just. She believes the war is just and winnable at the start. Right? She believes in the magic-fueled monarchy that she lives in Lescan. She believes that the Denlanders to their south became consumed with the evil ideology of republicanism, murdered their king and aristocracy, and are dead set on doing the same in Lescan. She just doesn't like the cost of the war. She doesn't like seeing the surviving male members of her family after her father's suicide being dragged off to war one after another. When she tries to lobby the unscrupulous and thoroughly unpatriotic local administrator, Mr. Northway, who she blames in part for her father's death, She tries to lobby him to make an exception and not take her younger brother. And he tells her that he can't justify to the monarchy holding another man back from the front, no matter how young. And then he punctures her illusions just a little about how well the war can be going. Asking how well it can be going if they have to keep drafting more men. But she's still proud as her younger brother leaves to fight the war, to fight for his country. And when even that isn't enough, when they run out of living men and her house is forced to send a woman, Emily doesn't let a servant go to the war and risk death on her behalf. She volunteers, refusing Mr. Northway's offer to help her evade the war by acting as secretary for him, but agreeing to write back and forth and always tell the truth to each other. And then she reaches the front, where some of the lies are exposed. It's clear that they are not on the cusp of victory in the swamps. They get lost almost every time they enter the swamp. Eventually their weapons are outranged by the Dunlanders, but she fights on and is elevated higher and higher in the officers' ranks. And the whole time, Emily writes back and forth to Mr. Northway, using his couriers to avoid the military censor, with them clinging to each other as a source of truth. She sees a few more cracks when she's briefly a prisoner of war, but she never loses faith that the war may still be won on the other front. As she prepares her last stand, the opposing commander calls a parley and delivers the news and then proof that the war is over. Denland won on the other front, and his conquered Lascan behind her. The king turned tail and fled. And that's when she realizes that everything she's been told about the war was a lie, and goes on to live out the aftermath of the war. In wartime, the only way to see some of the truth is to have a bone-deep distrust for government propaganda. You can have it from the beginning, like the cynical Mr. Northway, or you can develop it like Emily. But ultimately, even finding those scraps of truth will not help you. No amount of knowledge passed back and forth between Mr. Northway and Emily could save the lives of the men that she was leading or keep her safe on the front line. And if you were one of the men kidnapped off the streets of Kyiv and involuntarily forced into the meat grinder of the front line, you wouldn't be saved by having known first that the war was unwinnable and second that it was being fought for a lie. The fog of wartime propaganda is dangerous to you, even if you manage to partially see through it. Fog is stronger than the strongest soldier, and that doesn't take away from her strength. I hope you've enjoyed your time in the Story Truth Mine. You are welcome back anytime.